Councilman Gunkov, you have the mic, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. First and foremost, I want to thank the members of the community here, members of the Providence Police Department for all that you do to serve our communities. My heart also goes out to the families that have recently been impacted. I want to thank Chief Clements. Thank you, Commissioner Perry, FOP President Mr. Armundi, Mr. Huntley, Lieutenant O'Brien from our district, and Lieutenant Default in our district also for their leadership and the important work that they do in the city. I also called for this meeting because many of my constituents do not feel safe. I also grew up in my ward, and I personally would like to put politics aside and think about real sustainable solutions that will keep our communities safe. This isn't about slogans or ideologies or demonizing our police. This is about solving a real problem. That's the recent violence, the gun problems, the ATVs that we're experiencing in our city. People are literally dying. People are afraid. With all the tension that we're experiencing nationally and locally around policing, we need to bridge the gap. And ultimately, I hope that we can work together on real, robust solutions to address this issue. We have to get it right. And we appreciate your expertise and experience in policing. And from your perspective, what more needs to be done? We've heard a lot tonight. But in your opinion, to strengthen the relationship between police and all the communities that we serve here in Providence, particularly our communities of color who may feel a lack of trust in policing right now, what do you think needs to be done better to strengthen the bonds with the community and the police? And if you can elaborate on specifics, whether it's implicit bias training, cultural competency, diversity in your ranks, to ultimately build the trust that we need to see in our communities.
I think you've touched directly on it, Councilman, and thank you for the words about the Providence Police. But the recruitment efforts that we've had in the Providence Police Department, I identified 164 in the schools that have graduated, 101 of minority status. This present academy, 4930 of minority status. That's become a focus, a focal point of the command staff and the commissioner of this police department to direct our attention towards making the men and women more closely reflect the demographics of the city. That's important. Number two, training. People think that police officers are extremely well trained to a high level. And quite frankly, with the burden that we have with chronic addiction, homelessness, mental illness, it quite simply isn't true. We are not trained nearly to the level of trained clinicians. However, that burden has been placed squarely at our feet, has it not? And that being said, I think we've done it to an extremely effective level over the years. You look at the incidents. We look at all these incidents that we're involved in, whether it's respond to the scene of a mentally disturbed person, respond to a disturbance, respond to a man with a gun, all of those. 90+ to high levels % of those are resolved and they're de-escalated. And that's because of more so not the training, but the experience of the Providence Police. We recently went through that training, and I want to thank the Rhode Island Foundation and Neil Steinberg. Thank God we have the relationships we do and the connections within our community that we do to foster this type of positive outlook going forward. So we trained the entire Providence Police Department as of last week, including the academy, the recruits in the academy. As far as closer connections with our community, we can't do enough of it. But you know, when I first started to speak about our efforts around diversion with the council, many of the council members, many in the city, did not realize what we had already been doing. We have so many partnerships with social service agencies. As Cedric identified, we've been connected at the hip with the Institute for 18 plus years. I've served on the board for many of those years. To answer your question directly, we can't do enough of it. We have to continue to make those connections in the community. I think the Providence Police Department, the men and women, there are some units in this department, every single day, they're telling me how they're connecting with the community, having conversations, outreach. I want to thank not only the sworn staff of the Providence Police Department, but the civilian staff. And I'll point to, some of the preparation we had for tonight was from that civilian staff. And Tina Shepard, community relations specialist. We do so much in the community. We could send you a template from her and Captain Remolino, all of the outreach we've done in this community. It's pretty impressive. It really is. But to answer your question directly, we can't do enough of it. And we need to continue those conversations. And I think the men and women of the Providence Police Department have always been open to those tough conversations and reform, positive reform to police this city in a better manner.
Thank you for that, Chief. And thanks for all the robust partnerships that we've experienced in the city. As we know, crime and poverty are related. Crime in many cases manifests itself in the lack of educational opportunities, the lack of meaningful employment options, the lack of housing. So education, jobs, keeping our recreation centers open, that's what we hear from our youth and our families. We need to fund and invest and address those root causes. But what do you think we can do and should do as the legislative branch of government to tackle these issues so that we're preventing and also addressing some of the root causes of crime in the first place? This question goes to anyone who is willing to answer it.
It is all about opportunity and resources. And again, I don't think members of the Providence Police can have enough training. But from the council standpoint, funding is a big issue. I can tell you many of the programs that we've run, one in particular, we've had astounding success at in the police department. As an example, the YPI, the Youth Police Initiative. This is a program where we handpick, not us, predominantly we've done this program in public housing, where public housing, and we have a great relationship with Providence Housing Authority and its executive director. They will handpick young men originally, and then later women in those public housing developments who are at risk and generally do not like uniformed members, men and women of the Providence Police Department. And the same for the men and women that work in those neighborhoods. There's a level of distrust. So we ran this YPI program, several sessions. I believe we're up to 13 or 14. We can't do enough of those sessions because every time we do them, and these young men and women, they develop such a relationship with the officers who work in those areas. And by the end of the session, I've gone to every single graduation, and they were offered a dinner and an opportunity to go before the microphone and speak about what they've learned and where they are now. And everyone on the council should go to the next graduation. In this council, I know we've spoken about it, should fund several of these YPIs, because each of these young women who are brave enough to go to the microphone talk about how my new best friend is Jose Pineda, Joe Iannucci, or whoever was their mentor in that program. And at least half of them say, I want to become a Providence police officer. And they started as at-risk youth. And by the end of the program, several of them want to become a Providence police officer. Those type programs. The Providence Police Explorers program, we've run for over 30 years. It is a model in New England. There are over 100 graduates of the Providence Police Explorers program who are now police officers or correctional officers, including as far away as the NYPD, but several on the Providence Police. Those programs, we can't do enough of. They're not all connected with the Institute, but these are all programs that are successful. And those are long-term strategies to keep young men and women away from errant behavior and the wrong path in life. And we've been successful. We can't do enough of it. And any funding the council can give us with the Recovery Act money, especially on YPI, we would love to do one after another. And one more thing with the recovery money, I would love to see members of this council, members of the community, members of the media, to go through our next several sessions. We want to keep the academy staff in place and run some citizens academies. And I really want you to see how truly dynamic, unpredictable, dangerous this job is, and run you through scenarios. It's a tough assignment out there. It really is. And I think it would be helpful for the council.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing those stories. I actually spoke to a police officer recently, and he lives in the city, grew up in the city, a male of color, has children, decided to do the job to serve the community, to change the narrative around policing. And he told me that morale across the department is low. It's a tough job. He might not come back home to his family. Are you hearing that from other officers of color, particularly from Providence? And what are the implications for that? Are you seeing recidivism in people leaving the job early, especially some of our more diverse officers?
No question at this moment, members of the police department, including me, are frustrated, we're demoralized, and that goes right to every young officer on the job. That's because of national and local conversations. And I think I've touched upon it, that I know we can do better in this city. And we have solutions. There is a fix here. There really is. ATVs is a really complicated, tough issue, but on crime and bringing the police department more closely connected with the community. We're very connected. I mean, however, we can't do enough of it. There are so many groups that we connect with, but morale is extremely low. It's I won't say it's as low as it's ever been, but around the country, police officers are demoralized, and that's happened here. I think police officers are about to leave in much larger numbers. I don't think the city of Providence should let that happen. You know, I think we should pick it up. I think, like Cedric says, like we've all said, we have an opportunity to move forward, and I know that we can. I mean, we all love this city, and I think we have an opportunity from this point on to move it forward in a positive way with some of these long-term strategies. And we'll always have the short-term issues and react to crime. We have our long-term strategies, our short-term strategies, but we always have to deal with what's happening at the moment. And we're dealing with that right now.
Thank you. Might I add, this officer is really dedicated to the community. This is a community guy, and so I thought that was very telling.
I might expand upon what some of the colonel was touching on. You know, the program that for the youth, that's a great program, and he touched on community civilian police academy, which I was going to bring up. But I would also task, you know, some of the council members, if they'd like, to go along on a ride along with officers for several days, so they can see exactly how the community and the you know, officers interact with each other, and to see the behavioral patterns between both. You know, it might be eye-opening, it might be enlightening, it might be horrifying, who knows? It could be any one of those things. But I think it would give everybody in this room a better grasp of what Providence police officer goes through on a daily basis. And I think it would be very instrumental in, you know, helping you to better understand what it is to be a police officer and what you deal with on a daily basis, rather than just seeing it in the news or hearing people's opinions on it. You can live it for yourselves and make your own determinations and decisions. I think that would be a great starting place. To expand on some of the other things, you know, we have youth services, you know, police officers in the school resource officers. You know, there's been some conversations going back and forth of whether we should have them, whether we shouldn't have them, whatnot. Those officers in the schools are the gap, the bridge for that gap between youth and adulthood. And the bonds that they form with a lot of those youths in the city translates into how they're going to view police officers when they become into adulthood. It is a unit that doesn't get a lot of praise, but they should, because the work they do affects people, future generations in the city. and they do amazing work. And I want to just touch on that because, you know, we don't need to get rid of them in the schools. We need to keep them in the schools because they're an extra tool that helps to educate the children in that school as to police officers can be your friends and will be your friends, you know, but they'll also hold the line when you do something wrong. And they give them that, listen, you're going to be held accountable, but we're here to help you and get you through it as well. So those things there, and to touch upon, you know, officers leaving the job and whatnot, right now you have a large group of officers who are seeking positions elsewhere. You know, and it's terrible to say that because Providence foots the bill for training these officers. And I believe I had this conversation going back almost a year ago with Councilwoman Harris on a Zoom call. And I explained to her that, you know, we train these officers and we pay for these officers to be trained and we get them through their probationary period. And then they just go somewhere else, you know, and that impacts our ranks. And it's not fair to the city that they leave and go elsewhere. But the catalyst for them leaving and going elsewhere is the atmosphere that they work in. Okay. And not feeling support. And as you know, Mr. Huntley said, support, you have to support, just like we have to support the community. We have to support, you know, the citizens. You have to support your police as well. And that's going to bring morale up. And if morale is up high on this job as police officers, you're going to retain the best officers you have. You're going to retain them. They're not going to leave and go other places. We've had 3 officers in the last month leave to go to the Veterans Administration. 3 veteran officers leave because they didn't want to deal with Providence anymore. You know, we've had at least 10 officers in the last 2 years leave to go other places, more than that, actually. Mass State Police, Connecticut, South Kingston. We have people in the process to go to other places in Rhode Island right now that have only been on the job for a year or 2. That's not positive. That's not good. We need to do everything we can to keep the officers here once we train them and make it a place where they feel, you know, supported and where the morale is not rock bottom. I know the colonel said he doesn't believe it's the worst it's ever been. In the 26 years plus I've been here, it's the worst it's ever been for me, morale on this job. It is absolutely at the bottom of your shoes. That's where it's at. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, well, we need to do more to help, you know, as we move forward and do more to help the community. We also need to do help for the officers as well to show support.
Sure, and I'd love to talk more about the SRO conversation at some point. So with over 400 officers that we currently have on the force, some of the things that I often hear are about basic quality of life issues, the noise, the stray pipes, not just the ATVs, that's not being addressed. What do you think that we could be doing differently?
Directed patrols. So as it pertains to straight pipes, whether it be on Thayer Street or Atwells Avenue, I know that Newport has done a lot around that initiative. I spoke with a lieutenant from Newport the other day, and we're ready to address some of those issues in those hot button areas, whether it be South Main Street, South Water Street, and to posting. So it's education within the community. So we need signage on Thayer Street, Atwells Avenue, in the areas where we're having issues with motorcycles, with a straight pipe issue, and then give our officers who are on directed patrols the latitude to enforce it. Look, I said it in the beginning, what we should be doing as a police department is problem-oriented policing, going to neighborhood meetings, listening to the problems in the neighborhood, and then directing our patrols towards those issues. Quite simply, we're at a critically low number right now, and we're having a very, very, very difficult time in doing that. When we go plus 50, plus 49, November 6th, and once they get through their FTO training, and once we announce another academy, and once we divert some of the challenges that had been put on the police, I know we've talked about more diversion in the police department, and maybe taking away some of the challenges that we have, like that, you know, they're lower level and maybe police officers don't have to respond to, maybe civilians could respond to. We've embraced that, but that's all funding, and that's going to take time to put into place. So maybe, you know, off the top, we could talk about eliminating responding to accidents, which is a high volume of what we do. Eliminating the type of calls that we respond to that maybe a clinician or civilian could respond to as it relates to noise. But I caution, you know, some of these events that we respond to that are minor in nature, at some point, you need a policeman nearby because the clinicians will tell you that. So again, much of it is centered around resources.
All right, my last question is, you know, the nation's murder rate rose by almost 25% last year. If you look at the data in large cities, increases in homicides are spiking across the country, and that's exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously. That's alarming. Is Providence safe?
The last couple of weeks, there have been incidents. Certainly, you could certainly say the woman surrounded by the ATVs and the horrific acts of violence that we've seen, of course, that you don't consider Providence safe. But generally speaking, you look at the data. Look, each number is a victim, and we can't lose sight of that. But big picture, look at the data, look at the month to month, look at the 5-year average. Providence can be a much safer city, but in general, the data will show you Providence is a safe city.
Thank you, Chief. And thank you for answering my questions. And, you know, I ultimately hope that we can work together to figure out the solutions and do everything that we can to keep the residents of the city safe. Thanks, Council President.
Thank you.